All right, so are you ready for this one?
Oh, yeah. Bring it on.
Okay, good. Because today we're diving deep into the world of Bill Maher.
Bill Maher.
Yeah, you know that comedian, political commentator,
Oh, yeah.
and longtime host of HBO's Real Time?
Real Time with Bill Maher.
Yeah, you sent over a ton of articles.
Well, I did.
Even encyclopedia entries.
Yeah.
So I can already tell you're really trying to figure out, is this guy a visionary
Right.
who's ahead of his time,
Right.
or just really good at pushing people's buttons?
Yeah. Is he gifted or is he a grifter?
Yeah, like, is he actually like a good guy?
Right.
Or is he just trying to, rile people up to make money?
Yeah, to get those clicks.
Yeah, exactly.
To stir the pot.
So to get to the bottom of this, let's go back to the 90s.
Okay.
The era of politically incorrect.
Oh, yeah.
What I find so fascinating is how the show's themes, like challenging so-called political correctness,
Right.
are still relevant today.
Mm-hmm.
Only now we call it wokeness.
Oh, yeah, totally.
That's like, was he ahead of the curve? Or was it all just shock value back then?
Well, I mean, politically incorrect was definitely groundbreaking.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a time when the concept of political correctness was really taking hold.
Right.
And Maher was one of the first to openly and humorously challenge it.
Right.
And you have to remember, this was before social media
Oh, yeah.
and the 24/7 news cycle. So
It was a different world.
it was a totally different world.
Yeah.
So he was really pushing boundaries in a way that feels almost quaint now.
Right. And you included a piece about how some of the guests on that show were quite surprising for the time.
Absolutely.
Like, you wouldn't see that today.
No, you wouldn't. And he had everyone from politicians and pundits to celebrities and activists.
Wow.
And he wasn't afraid to tackle any controversial topic, even if it meant making people uncomfortable.
Right.
And he often did.
Okay, so let's fast forward to Real Time with Bill Maher.
Okay.
So he's still sharp and provocative.
Yeah.
But you included some think pieces arguing that he's gone from a liberal hero
Yeah.
to public enemy #1 for some on the left.
Right.
What do you make of that shift?
It's fascinating, isn't it? Because he's known for criticizing both sides of the aisle.
Right.
But lately, he seems to be focusing more on what he sees as the excesses of the woke left.
Okay.
He's been particularly critical of cancel culture and identity politics and what he calls the language policing that he sees happening on college campuses and online.
So is that where those grifter accusations come in?
Yeah.
Like, is he just trying to stay relevant by appealing to a more conservative audience?
I mean, it's a valid question.
Yeah.
Because some critics argue that he's become a bit of a caricature of himself.
Okay.
A contrarian just for the sake of being contrarian.
Right.
But others say that he's simply staying true to his principles,
Okay.
which have always been rooted in free speech and individual liberty.
Yeah, it's like, is he being genuine
Right.
or is he putting on a show?
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's telling that even some of his most ardent critics acknowledge his comedic talent.
Oh, absolutely.
You sent a clip of his New Rules segment
Yes.
where he absolutely eviscerates this one politician.
Oh, yeah. He's hilarious.
And it's hilarious.
He is a master of satire.
Oh, yeah.
No doubt about it.
Yeah.
And he uses that humor to expose hypocrisy and to challenge conventional thinking.
Right.
But it's also that humor that sometimes lands him in hot water.
Well, speaking of hot water, let's talk about the controversies.
Okay.
There's the incident where he used the N-word on his show.
Right.
His defense of Chris Matthews against those sexual harassment claims.
Yeah.
And his comments about Islam that sparked accusations of Islamophobia.
Right.
Are these just gaffes, or is there a pattern of problematic behavior?
I mean, those incidents definitely damaged his reputation with some.
Yeah.
And there's no excuse for using that kind of language.
Yeah,
but
right.
his defenders argue that he's not a bigot, just a comedian who sometimes pushes the boundaries too far.
Right. And it's comedy.
Right.
So how far is too far?
Exactly. And that's always the question with him, right? Where's the line?
And there are even some on the left who believe he's being unfairly targeted
Yeah.
by the woke mob, as he calls it.
Right.
They say he's being punished for expressing dissenting opinions, which stifles open debate.
And it's a valid point because there's a growing concern about the chilling effect of cancel culture,
Right.
even among those who support its broader goals of social justice.
Right, so it's not a simple black and white situation.
No, it's very nuanced.
And this brings us to another area where he's been incredibly outspoken: cannabis legalization.
Oh, yeah. He's been a huge advocate for that for years.
Yeah, I mean, this is a guy who's been on the advisory board of Normal Mel and the Marijuana Policy Project for years.
Right.
It seems like this is more than just a for the laughs kind of issue for him.
It definitely seems that way, because if you look at his arguments, he's not just saying like, hey, weed is fun, let's legalize it.
Right.
He frames it as a matter of personal liberty, social justice, and government overreach.
Yeah.
So it's tied to his broader libertarian philosophy. He often compares the war on drugs to the Prohibition era, arguing that it's been this costly and ultimately futile effort that's disproportionately harmed marginalized communities.
So is this where we see a more genuine side of Bill Maher?
Maybe.
The activist who truly believes in the causes he champions?
It's possible.
Or is it all part of his carefully crafted persona, a way to appeal to a younger, more liberal audience?
I think it's important to remember that he's been advocating for cannabis legalization for decades.
Really?
Long before it became mainstream.
Wow.
And he's put his money where his mouth is donating to organizations lobbying politicians.
Okay.
So it does suggest a level of commitment that goes beyond just mere posturing.
All right, so we're seeing a more nuanced picture emerging.
Definitely.
And this is where his stance on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict comes in,
Oh, boy.
which you highlighted with several op-eds and even a transcript of one of his monologues.
Right.
He's a staunch supporter of Israel.
He is.
And he's been very critical of the BDS movement. He's even said that Hamas is a terrorist organization that shouldn't be negotiated with.
Which is a very controversial statement.
Yeah, and this is a topic where he's been accused of both Islamophobia
Right.
and of being a shill for the Israeli government.
Right. It's like he can't win.
Yeah, he vehemently denies both charges,
Of course.
arguing that he supports Israel because it's a liberal democracy in a region dominated by authoritarian regimes.
Right.
But some critics argue that his stance is overly simplistic,
Yeah.
that he ignores the complexities of the conflict
Right.
and the suffering of the Palestinian people.
And they point to his language, which can be quite inflammatory at times.
Oh, yeah.
He's drawn comparisons between Hamas and the Nazis, which many find offensive and historically inaccurate.
So is this a blind spot for Maher?
I mean, it's possible.
Is he so focused on his pro-Israel stance that he's unable to see the other side of the story?
It could be.
Or is he deliberately playing to a certain audience, knowing that his provocative statements will generate headlines and keep him in the public eye?
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible that he's just really passionate about this issue
Right.
and that his strong opinions kind of cloud his judgment.
Okay.
Or it could be that he's deliberately courting controversy knowing that it's good for business.
That's where it gets tricky.
Exactly.
How do we separate the genuine convictions
Right.
from the calculated provocations?
And that's the challenge we're facing with Bill Maher.
Right.
He's a master of walking that tightrope between insight and outrage.
And that's what makes him so compelling, isn't it?
Absolutely.
We're drawn to his wit and intelligence,
Mm-hmm.
but we're also wary of his tendency to cross the line.
Yeah, you never know what he's going to say.
Yeah, and he just keeps us guessing.
He does.
And he forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about ourselves and our society.
He really does. He holds up a mirror to us.
All right, we've covered a lot of ground, but we're just getting started.
Oh, yeah, there's so much more to unpack here.
Yeah, after a quick break, we'll delve deeper into his anti-woke stance, his atheism, and even his surprising foray into the world of podcasting. Stick with us.
So you know this anti-woke label?
Right.
He seems to wear it almost as a badge of honor now.
Yeah, it's like his brand.
It's become central to his brand, hasn't it?
Yeah, and you even sent his book, Adulting, How to Become a Grown-Up in 468 Easy-ish Steps,
Oh, yeah.
which seems like a tongue-in-cheek jab at what he sees as this infantilization of American culture.
Right, like everyone's a baby.
Yeah.
He's very much like a you need to grow up.
Yeah, tough love.
Yeah, tough love.
And he's definitely not afraid to criticize his own side
No, he's not.
and call out what he sees as hypocrisy, even if it makes him unpopular with some on the left.
Yeah, and it often does.
Yeah, it's like he relishes being the contrarian,
He does.
the guy who challenges the dogma no matter what.
There's that independent streak in him, right?
Yeah.
That refusal to be boxed in. I think it's part of his appeal.
Okay.
But it's also what makes him so unpredictable.
Okay, so let's talk about another area where he definitely doesn't shy away from controversy, his atheism.
Right.
You included a bunch of articles about his documentary, Religulous,
Oh, yeah.
where he really takes aim at organized religion.
Mm-hmm.
What's interesting to me is this just Maher being provocative again?
Right.
Or is there a deeper philosophical argument there?
Well, I mean, remember, he sees himself as a rationalist,
Okay.
a champion of reason and logic.
Right.
And to him, organized religion represents the antithesis of that.
Okay.
He sees it as a source of division and conflict and irrationality in the world.
Yeah, and you included one of his stand-up routines
Yes.
where he jokes about how religion is like believing in Santa Claus for grown-ups.
Right.
But then in his more serious commentary, he connects religious beliefs to things like opposition to science, anti-LGBTQ stances, and even violence.
Yeah, he sees a connection there.
Yeah, and he's especially critical of fundamentalist Christianity and its influence on American politics.
Yeah.
He sees it as a threat to democracy and progress, and he's not afraid to say so.
Nope.
Which, of course, has made him a target of conservative religious groups.
Oh, yeah.
You included a clip of one televangelist calling him a servant of Satan.
I did.
So, that's pretty extreme.
It is, but it shows you the level of animosity that he faces.
But it's not like he lumps all religions together.
No.
Right, in some of his writing that you sent.
Right.
He draws a distinction between fundamentalism and more liberal interpretations of faith.
Right.
He's even said that he admires some aspects of Buddhism and Taoism.
Right. So, again, we see the nuance.
Yeah.
It's not just like Bill Maher hates religion.
Right.
It's more about him questioning dogma and blind faith.
And that's his thing, right?
Which, when you think about it, is in line with his whole shtick.
Yeah, exactly. It's about challenging authority and thinking for yourself whether that authority is religious, political, or cultural. And speaking of challenging authority, let's talk about his stance on gun control.
Okay.
Now, this is where it gets really interesting.
Yeah.
Because from what you sent, he's actually a gun owner himself.
That's right.
Which I found surprising.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize that. But he is, and he's a strong supporter of the Second Amendment.
Okay.
But he's also been very vocal about the need for common sense gun regulations.
Okay, so it's not just like, everyone should have a gun no matter what.
No, it's not that black and white for him.
You even flagged a clip from his show.
I did.
Where he debates a gun rights activist and argues that the Founding Fathers couldn't have possibly envisioned the kind of weaponry we have today.
Right. Muskets versus AR-15s. It's a different world.
When they wrote the Second Amendment.
Right.
So he's made the point that while he believes in the right to own a gun for self-defense, he doesn't think that right extends to owning military-style assault weapons. And he's also criticized the glorification of violence in Hollywood.
Yeah.
Arguing that it contributes to gun violence in America.
Interesting.
This really shows how he's willing to take on sacred cows.
He does.
On both sides of the aisle.
It's that independence streak again.
Yeah.
He's not beholden to any ideology.
Right.
And he's not afraid to alienate people on both the left and the right.
And you have to admire his willingness to engage in those difficult conversations.
You do.
Even when he knows they're going to be controversial.
It takes guts.
Okay. So we've talked about his controversial statements, his activism, his atheism, and his nuanced stance on gun control.
We have.
Now let's talk about his longevity.
Okay.
This guy has been a fixture in the entertainment industry for over 3 decades.
A long time.
What's his secret?
I think it's a combination of factors.
Yeah.
I mean, first, he's incredibly talented.
Right.
He's a sharp writer, a witty commentator, and a skilled interviewer. He knows how to work a crowd and how to make even complex topics entertaining.
Yeah, and you can tell he really enjoys what he does.
Oh, yeah.
There's a genuine passion there that comes through, even when he's being provocative.
Absolutely. He's not just going through the motions.
Right.
He genuinely cares about the issues he talks about.
Okay.
And he wants to engage his audience in a meaningful way.
I think another part of his success is his willingness to evolve.
Yeah, he's not stuck in his ways.
He's not afraid to change his mind or to admit when he's wrong.
Exactly.
He's constantly learning and growing, which keeps his material fresh and relevant. He's been very open about how his views on certain issues have changed over time.
Yeah.
Like his stance on nuclear power, for example.
Oh, right.
He used to be vehemently opposed to it.
He was.
But after doing more research, he's come around to seeing it as a potential solution to climate change.
Yeah, that's a big shift.
And that takes a certain level of intellectual honesty.
It does.
Which is rare these days, especially in the world of media and politics.
Especially these days.
Yeah, where everyone's just digging their heels in.
Yeah. Never admitting they're wrong.
And it also reflects his commitment to being a truth seeker. Even if that means challenging his own preconceived notions.
It's admirable.
And let's not forget his courage.
Right.
He's not afraid to speak his mind, even when he knows it's going to generate controversy.
He is fearless in that way.
He's willing to take risks, to push boundaries, and to challenge the status quo.
And that's what makes him a refreshing voice.
Yeah.
In an era of increasing conformity and polarization.
Yeah, it's like everyone's afraid to say the wrong thing.
Right. Everyone's walking on eggshells.
But he's not.
No, he doesn't care.
He's just like, I'm going to say what I think.
And that's refreshing.
So it's not just about being funny or provocative.
Right.
It's about having something to say.
Yeah.
And having the guts to say it, even if it means making enemies along the way.
And he's made plenty of enemies.
And, speaking of making us think and feel, we've focused a lot on his public persona.
Right.
But you included a really interesting profile on him.
I did.
That delves into his personal life.
Yeah.
It's easy to forget that he's a real person.
He is.
With real feelings and experiences.
Right.
He's been very open about his struggles with relationships, his love of animals, and his passion for poker.
I mean, who knew?
Right? He even talks about his insecurities and his fears.
Which makes him seem more relatable.
Yeah.
More human.
And despite his reputation for being abrasive and confrontational,
right,
those who know him personally describe him as warm, generous, and even shy at times.
Really?
Which I find hard to believe.
It's fascinating how our public perception of someone can be so different from who they are in private.
Yeah.
And I think that's a valuable reminder.
Totally.
That we should always be careful about judging people based on their media persona.
Absolutely. There's always more to the story than meets the eye.
Always.
And with someone as complex as Bill Maher,
right,
I think it's especially important to keep that in mind.
I agree.
Okay. We've explored a lot of facets of Bill Maher's career and personality.
We.
But there's one more intriguing piece of the puzzle we need to examine.
Oh.
His evolving role in the media landscape.
Okay.
And his surprising foray into the world of podcasting. Yeah, it really is amazing how he's managed to stay relevant for so long.
I know, right? He started back in the days of stand-up comedy clubs and late-night talk shows, and now he's navigating this whole world of streaming services and podcasts.
And he could have easily just kept doing the same thing.
Totally.
Right? But he seems to have this drive to keep evolving,
Yeah.
to connect with audiences in new ways.
Yeah, and that's where his podcast Club Random comes in.
Oh, yeah, Club Random.
He calls it a place for conversations that are free-flowing, unpredictable, and uncensored.
Right.
You even included a few episodes in your research.
I did, yeah, and it's a fascinating mix of guests.
Oh, yeah.
He's had everyone from Woody Harrelson and Quentin Tarantino to scientists, authors,
wow,
and even a few politicians.
It's all over the map.
It seems like he's using the podcast to explore a wider range of topics, to have those deeper, more personal conversations that he might not be able to have on his HBO show.
Right, because of the format.
Right.
It's much more casual.
Yeah, it's like a peek behind the curtain, getting to see a different side of him.
And I think it also shows that he understands how the media landscape is changing.
Yeah.
You know, people are consuming content in different ways now.
Right.
And he's adapting.
He's not just a TV personality anymore.
No.
He's a multi-platform content creator, which is pretty savvy.
It is.
For someone who started his career in the 80s.
I mean, he's ahead of the curve in that way.
Yeah, and it allows him to reach a broader audience.
Right.
People who might not even have HBO.
Exactly.
What I find interesting is that he's not afraid to experiment with the format.
Okay, how so?
He's done solo episodes, interviews, even panel discussions.
Wow.
So he's really playing with it.
He's not afraid to try new things.
It feels very authentic and spontaneous, which is a nice contrast to the more polished, produced feel of his TV show.
Right, there's less of a filter.
Yeah, and, in a world where everything feels so scripted and overproduced, that rawness is really refreshing.
I agree.
Like, it feels more real,
all right,
more human.
I think that's what people are craving these days.
Totally.
We're tired of the slick, prepackaged content.
Right.
They want something that feels real, something that feels human.
And that's where Bill Maher shines.
He does.
He's not afraid to be himself.
Yeah.
Flaws and all.
Warts and all.
He's not afraid to speak his mind, even if it means making people uncomfortable.
And we've seen that time and time again.
And he's not afraid to lash at himself.
Right.
Which makes him all the more likable.
Absolutely.
So after this deep dive, after all these articles and clips and discussions, what's the final verdict?
The million-dollar question.
Grifter or gifted?
Right. Is he a force for good or a harmful influence?
What do you think?
Honestly, there's no easy answer.
Yeah.
He's a complex figure who defies simple categorization.
Right.
Brilliant and infuriating.
Yeah.
Insightful and offensive. Hilarious and sometimes cringeworthy.
He really runs the gamut.
He does.
He's a product of his time.
Yeah.
But he's also this unique individual who's carved out his own path.
He's a true original.
And he's challenged us to think critically.
He has.
To question our assumptions and to engage in meaningful conversations about the issues that matter.
And that's important.
And he's done it all with a sharp wit and a willingness to push boundaries. That's both refreshing and unsettling.
It's a delicate balance.
Yeah, at the end of the day, I think what makes Bill Maher so compelling is that he makes us think.
He does.
He makes us feel, he makes us question.
Yeah.
He's not just a comedian or a commentator.
Right.
He's a provocateur,
Mm-hmm.
a truth teller, even if that truth is sometimes hard to swallow.
And sometimes it is.
He doesn't offer easy answers or simple solutions.
No.
He forces us to confront the complexities of our world and to do the messy, challenging work of figuring things out for ourselves.
And that's ultimately what makes him so valuable.
And he's a master at making us think. And maybe that's the greatest gift of all.
I think you're right.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of Bill Maher.
It's been a wild ride.
Keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep those brains buzzing.